There is a silent pain that dwells in the most sensitive hearts, the pain of being among people and yet feeling invisible, of speaking to the world, but realizing that almost no one truly listens, as if the words echoed into an unseen emptiness, and depth, instead of bringing closeness, created distance. Alan Watts once said that modern life has taught us to appear alive, but not to be alive. And it's precisely this difference between appearing and being that creates the abyss. Because the deep man doesn't fit into the spectacle of superficiality. He perceives the emptiness behind trivial conversations, the noise that tries to fill the silence, the fear disguised as self-sufficiency. And the more awakened he becomes, the more he feels the isolation of those who truly see. But perhaps this invisibility is not a punishment. Perhaps it's a calling toward a quieter, truer path, the one where the gaze turns inward and the being finds shelter in its own heart. In this video, we will explore the spiritual meaning of this invisibility and how it may not be a curse, but an initiation. Because deep down, being invisible is merely the first step toward being authentic, and authenticity is what remains when the entire world seems asleep. Chapter 1. The superficiality as the anesthesia of the modern soul. Alan Watts once said, "We are living in a culture entirely hypnotized by the illusion of time." He meant that our obsession with progress, success, and appearances has become a form of collective hypnosis, one that numbs the soul while stimulating the senses. In this trance, we mistake motion for meaning, noise for connection, and activity for purpose. The modern world has learned to decorate emptiness beautifully. We scroll, we post, we perform, constantly broadcasting fragments of ourselves, hoping someone might see beyond the surface. Yet the more visible we become online, the more invisible we feel within. Because what we really crave is not attention, but attunement, to be felt, not just noticed, to be seen through the eyes of presence, not through the lenses of algorithms. Watts believed that our superficiality is not born from evil, but from fear, the fear of silence, of stillness, of facing ourselves. So we keep ourselves busy, intoxicated with goals and distractions, afraid of what might emerge if we stop. Silence, after all, exposes what noise hides, and what noise hides is the truth of who we are. But there's something tragic and beautiful in this collective distraction. It shows that humanity is still searching, even if clumsily, for belonging, meaning, and love. Our problem is not that we are shallow, it's that we are terrified of depth. Because depth requires surrender. It asks us to feel what the world tells us to escape. The awakened soul feels this gap between what is and what pretends to be. He walks through crowds sensing the emptiness beneath the laughter, the loneliness behind the screens. And though this awareness may ache, it's also the beginning of liberation. For to see through illusion is painful, yes, but it's also sacred. Because once the anesthesia wears off, life, in all its rawness, begins to feel real again. Chapter 2. The Eye of the Awakened, when depth becomes a burden. There comes a moment in every awakening when clarity becomes heavy. To see clearly is to lose the comfort of illusion. It is the moment when the curtain falls, and the play of life, so brilliantly acted by society, begins to look artificial. Alan Watts described it as waking up from the dream of separateness. And once you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. For the awakened one, small talk feels suffocating. The daily chase for validation and status seems absurd. And yet, you cannot condemn the world for dreaming, for you too once dreamed it. That is the paradox, to hold compassion for the sleepers even as you stand apart from their sleep. Depth becomes a burden when it isolates you from the familiar. Friends drift away, conversations lose flavor, the places that once excited you now feel hollow. It's as if the light within you has changed the shape of the world, and the world no longer recognizes you. You become the quiet observer at the edge of the crowd, listening to the symphony of noise, sensing a deeper rhythm beneath it. Watts often reminded his students that you are an aperture through which the universe is looking at itself. When this realization dawns, the self begins to dissolve, and with it, the illusions that made life predictable. You see the absurdity of ego games, the tragedy of self-importance, and the beauty hidden in impermanence. But this vision can also ache, because it strips away the false comfort of belonging. The awakened one is not lonely because he lacks people. He is lonely because he no longer fits the collective dream. He feels the pulse of something greater, yet can't quite speak its language in the marketplace of minds. So he walks between worlds, the visible and the invisible, carrying the strange gift of awareness. And perhaps this is the hidden purpose of such solitude: to learn to see without judgment, to love without possession, and to exist without needing to be understood. For when depth becomes a burden, it is only because the heart has grown larger than the world's disguise. Chapter 3, Spiritual Invisibility, the gift and the burden of seeing what others cannot. Alan Watts once said, "You are something the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing." But when you realize this, when you truly feel your unity with everything, the world begins to treat you differently. It's not that people intentionally ignore you, it's that your vibration no longer matches the frequency of noise. You move quietly through places that once defined you, and suddenly you notice how unseen you've become. This is the paradox of awakening. The more conscious you are, the less visible you become to those still lost in sleep. Your energy no longer feeds the drama, the gossip, or the endless cycle of validation. And because you no longer mirror the illusions of others, they can no longer see themselves in you. So they turn away, not out of rejection, but out of confusion. To the spiritually unseen, invisibility can feel like exile, like shouting truth into a void. But this void, if you learn to listen, is sacred. It is not a punishment. It is a sanctuary. It's the universe pulling you inward, away from the noise, toward a deeper kind of belonging, the belonging of the soul with itself. Watts believed that the true self is not found in the gaze of others, but in the stillness that remains when the gaze disappears. He would remind his listeners that the light of consciousness does not need an audience. When no one sees you, it's because life is asking you to see yourself, fully, tenderly, without performance. This kind of invisibility strips away everything false. It takes away the need to impress, to be understood, to be validated. And what remains is essence, raw, unpolished, and alive. You begin to notice that silence speaks louder than attention, and presence shines brighter than recognition. So yes, the gift of seeing what others cannot is often the burden of being unseen, but in that burden lies the birth of a deeper freedom. To exist without the need to be seen, to love without being understood, and to shine without asking for light in return. Chapter 4, The Alchemy of Solitude, Transforming Isolation into Inner Power. There is a moment in every seeker's path when silence becomes unbearable, the absence of recognition, of validation, of belonging. It feels like the death of something once familiar. But what if that death is sacred? Alan Watts used to say that to be lonely is to feel the separation that does not exist. In other words, solitude is not the absence of others. It is the rediscovery of yourself beneath the noise. When the awakened one is left alone, he begins to dissolve. The masks that once gave him identity start to fall away, and the vastness of his own being begins to reveal itself. At first, it feels like drowning, too much silence, too much inner space, too much awareness. But with time, that silence becomes a teacher, a mirror, a womb. It becomes the sacred space where the soul remembers its original language. Watts believed that transformation is not achieved through effort, but through surrender. When you stop resisting solitude, you discover that alchemy was happening all along. The same way fire transforms metal, solitude refines the heart. It burns away the need to be seen and leaves only the essence that is real. You begin to notice that what you called loneliness was actually a process of purification, a gentle dismantling of everything that wasn't truly you. The power of solitude is not in isolation, but in intimacy with your own presence. It is here that creativity, intuition, and peace are born. The mind begins to soften, the heart opens quietly, and you start to sense the hum of life vibrating in everything, even in stillness. Watts once said, "When you stop chasing after what you think you want, you find what you truly need was already here." Solitude teaches exactly that. It shows that power does not come from control or approval, but from harmony, from being deeply attuned to yourself. So when life withdraws the crowd and leaves you in the silence of your own company, don't run, listen. Because solitude, when embraced, doesn't make you smaller. It reveals that you were never lost, only hidden beneath the noise of the world. Chapter 5. Belonging without losing yourself, living deeply in a shallow world. After awakening, the great challenge is not to escape the world, it is to remain within it without forgetting who you are. Alan Watts once said, "You don't look out there for God. Something in the sky, you look in you." But looking within doesn't mean turning away from the world. It means walking through it with eyes that see differently. The awakened soul eventually realizes that isolation was never the goal. It was preparation, a cleansing, a sacred pause. You were meant to return to the marketplace, but not as before. Now, you enter with awareness instead of attachment, with compassion instead of resentment. To belong without losing yourself is to live like a tree, rooted deeply in your essence, yet open to the winds of life. You speak, you laugh, you love, but no longer depend on the approval of others to define your worth. You learn to listen to the noise of the world without letting it drown your silence. You start to see that connection does not require conformity. It requires authenticity. Watts believed that when you stop trying to control life, you begin to dance with it. And that dance, between depth and lightness, solitude and presence, becomes your spiritual art. You find freedom in the paradox, to care without clinging, to participate without pretending, to love without losing yourself. This is how the awakened one learns to live among the asleep. He doesn't preach, he emanates. He doesn't need to convince, his stillness speaks. And though the world may remain loud and restless, he moves through it like water, soft, patient, and unbreakable. To live deeply in a shallow world is not rebellion, it is remembrance. It's remembering that the soul doesn't need validation, it needs resonance. And when you live from that inner resonance, even the simplest moments, a smile, a breeze, a sunset, become sacred encounters with existence itself. Chapter 6. The hidden beauty of being invisible. There is a quiet grace in not being seen. At first it feels like loss, like fading into the background of a world obsessed with visibility. But then something miraculous begins to happen. The more unseen you become to others, the more visible you become to yourself. Alan Watts once said, "The meaning of life is just to be alive." It is so plain and so obvious, and yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. To be invisible, in the spiritual sense, is to finally stop running, to stop performing for eyes that never truly saw you. It is to rediscover the beauty of existing without effort, without needing to prove, without needing to shine for anyone. Invisibility is the soul's camouflage. It protects what is sacred. When the world can no longer grasp you, it is because you've become too subtle to be captured by its illusions. You are no longer the reflection, but the mirror itself. You no longer crave the stage because the real theater unfolds within, where the self meets the infinite. What's believed that when we surrender our obsession with recognition, life begins to flow through us, like music through an instrument. We stop being performers and become conduits. And in that surrender, something exquisite arises. Peace. A peace that is not loud or dramatic, but soft, like sunlight filtering through leaves. To be invisible is not to disappear. It is to dissolve into life. It is to realize that your presence is not diminished by the world's blindness. It is simply unseen by those who are still learning to look. You are not absent. You are expanded. You exist in silence, in breath, in the unseen harmony that holds everything together. Invisibility, then, is not a punishment for your depth. It's the reward for it. It's the universe's way of saying, you no longer need to be noticed to exist. And when you understand that, you stop trying to shine because you have become the light itself. Conclusion: the sanctuary within, from invisibility to wholeness. Alan Watts often reminded his listeners that you are the universe experiencing itself. When you truly feel that, the idea of being invisible begins to dissolve, because how could the universe ever be unseen? Even in silence, it vibrates. Even in darkness, it glows. The path of the unseen soul is not about vanishing from the world. It is about returning home to the only place where truth resides, within. When life strips away your audience, it gives you intimacy with your essence. When others cannot see you, it invites you to see yourself with compassion, honesty, and awe. That is the secret initiation hidden inside the pain of invisibility, the awakening of self-recognition. Watts used to say that to be alive is to be related, and this truth remains even in solitude. You are never disconnected. You are connected through being. Every breath, every leaf, every whisper of the wind is part of you. You belong, not because you fit in, but because you exist. And that existence, quiet, invisible, free, is sacred. The world will keep spinning in its noise. People will still chase lights that fade, but you, the one who sees, will walk differently. You will move with softness, speak with presence, and love without condition. You will know that you don't need to be visible to make an impact. You only need to be real. So when you feel unseen, don't shrink. Breathe. Let the silence hold you, because that silence is not emptiness. It is your sanctuary, the space where you remember. You were never invisible. You were infinite.